the smell of charcoal and grease in the air, a loud laugh coming from the corner of the yard, a cold beer can in his hand, foam dripping down his thumb, smoke curling off the grill into a sky that looks like it was ordered for the occasion, clear, warm, the kind of late afternoon that makes everything feel like the right decision. Saturday afternoon in Rick's backyard feels like a locker room after a game won. A dozen guys from the print shop, hands stained with ink that retirement will never fully wash off, taking turns shaking his hand, slapping his back, saying the same thing, "You did it, man." And he did. Rick is 56 years old, $790,000 saved, house paid off, zero debt, and as of last Friday at 5 o'clock, he doesn't answer to anyone. 30 years on the floor of a regional print shop, loading plates on the Heidelberg before sunrise, training every new kid who walked through the door, keeping that press alive through 2 ownership changes and a paper shortage that almost shut the place down. Last Friday, the crew lined up the Heidelberg and ran a single job, a banner that read, "30 years, enjoy it, Rick." They hung it above the press he'd kept running since he was 26. That's done now, all of it. His wife snaps a photo of him raising his beer can, posts it with the caption, "Day 1 of the rest of his life." It's the most liked post she's ever made. By Sunday morning, it has 47 comments, every one of them some version of lucky man. Joe, who's run the finishing line next to Rick's press for 15 years, leans in and says, "You're the smartest guy I know." Rick laughs, and he believes it. And why wouldn't he? He did everything right, saved every month, never refinanced the house, never financed a car for more than 3 years. And when the financial advisor said you can walk away now, he signed the papers the next day. Everyone in that backyard wanted to be in his shoes. But 18 months after that barbecue, Rick is going to be sitting in a home office with his laptop open, sending out his 3rd resume in a month, and no one is going to call back. Nearly 1 in 3 retired Americans say they left too early. Not because of a money emergency, not because of a crisis, because of the collection of things no one warns you about before you sign the exit papers, and when you add them up in dollars, they turn that farewell barbecue into the most expensive day of your life. And the real cost of leaving 4 years too soon. It's not one number, it's 8 layers. 8 things Rick believed on the day of that barbecue that fell apart one by one over the 18 months that followed. Today you're going to understand the psychology of people who retired early and regretted it. And more importantly, you're going to understand why that regret has a price tag in dollars that nobody calculates until it's too late. I'll finally have time for everything. The first week felt like a vacation Rick had been owed for 30 years. Monday, he went fishing. Tuesday, he reorganized the garage and set up a workbench he'd been talking about since 2014. Wednesday, he started a series everyone at the shop had told him about. Thursday, he drove to the sporting goods store and bought a $200 tackle box and a new rod, the nice ones he could never justify on a work schedule. By Friday, he'd cooked breakfast for his wife, cleaned the gutters, and sat on the porch before noon with nothing left to do. And that was the first time he sat in the recliner. He'd bought it the week before leather, adjustable, the first gift of retirement to himself, a throne. He sat in it at 10:15 in the morning and realized he didn't know what to do next. Not in a panicked way, in a quiet way, like a dial tone. The second week was worse. Not because something bad happened, because nothing happened. The fishing trip was fun, but it lasted 4 hours. The workbench was set up, but he didn't have a project. The series was fine, but watching television at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday made him feel like he was skipping school, except there was no school to skip. Here's what no one tells you about time. When you're working, time is a scarce resource. You protect it, you fantasize about having more of it. But when every hour is free, time doesn't feel abundant. It feels shapeless. Hobbies that seem like a full life from the inside of a print shop, fishing, woodworking, watching games fill about 2 hours of a day. The other 14 waking hours just sit there, waiting for you to do something with them. Within 6 months, Rick had spent close to $2,000 on hobby equipment he barely touched. The tackle box, a table saw he used twice, 3 streaming subscriptions, a golf membership he went to 4 times. None of it was expensive on its own, but all of it pointed to the same thing: he was throwing money at a problem that money couldn't fix. The recliner was still there, and it was becoming less of a throne and more of a waiting room. But at least without the stress of work, his health was improving, right? I'll be healthier without the stress. This is one of the most dangerous beliefs about early retirement, and the data behind it should make anyone pause before signing the exit papers. Rick assumed, the way most people assume, that removing the stress of work would improve his health. No more 5:20 alarms, No more standing on concrete for 8 hours. No more deadlines, no more pressure, no more boss. His body would finally rest. His mind would finally breathe. That's not what happened. Within 4 months, Rick was sleeping 9 hours a night and still feeling tired. He stopped walking the shop floor 12,000 steps a day and replaced it with nothing. No commute meant no movement. No deadlines meant no urgency. No urgency meant no reason to get off the recliner before lunch. And here's where the research gets uncomfortable. A French analysis of more than 400,000 workers found that each additional year of work past the typical retirement age was associated with roughly 3% lower risk of dementia, even after excluding those who developed it within 5 years of retiring. The researchers called it mental retirement, not a medical term, a behavioral one. When the demands of work disappear, the problem solving, the deadlines, the social contact, the forced complexity cognition doesn't rest, it declines. And it's not just the brain. The Institute of Economic Affairs found that retirement increases the probability of clinical depression by about 40%, not among people who hated their jobs, among everyone. The structure disappears. The identity disappears. And what fills the gap isn't peace, it's a kind of low-grade fog that doesn't have a name, so nobody talks about it at the farewell barbecue. Rick didn't connect the dots right away. He thought he was just adjusting. He thought the fatigue was temporary. He stopped shaving every morning, not as a style choice, just because there was no reason. He stopped setting the coffee maker the night before. He started staying up until 1 in the morning watching nothing in particular, because it didn't matter when he woke up. And every one of those small changes pulled him a little further from the person who used to walk through the shop door at 5:45 with a thermos and a plan for the day. The body that he assumed would recover from 30 years of work was actually deteriorating, not from overuse, but from the sudden absence of demand. No financial plan in the world accounts for that cost. There's no line item on a spreadsheet for cognitive acceleration or creeping depression, but it compounds just the same. At least now he'd have time to travel. Now I'll finally travel. Rick had a list. Yellowstone, the Maine coast, a road trip through the Blue Ridge. For 30 years, he'd said, "When I retire," the way other people say someday. Always out there, always waiting, always attached to freedom. Month 2, he booked Yellowstone. Here's what he didn't calculate. His wife still works. She's 54 and has no plans to stop. She gets 3 weeks of vacation a year, and 2 of those are already committed to family visits. So Rick went to Yellowstone alone. He drove 11 hours, checked into a lodge, hiked to a waterfall, ate dinner by himself at a table for one, and called his wife from the parking lot. She was at the shop. He could hear the press running in the background, his press, the Heidelberg, and for the first time since he left, he felt something he didn't expect. He felt irrelevant. The second trip was the Maine coast with his wife, her one available week. It was nice. It was also $2,300 in 5 days. Hotels in July, lobster dinners, a whale watch that cost $95 per person. When you're working and you take a vacation, you absorb the cost because it's a break from the routine. When you're retired, there is no routine to break from, and the cost just sits there on the credit card statement staring at you. The third trip he canceled. Not because he couldn't afford it, because the math started to feel different. 3 trips in the first year cost him close to $6,000, roughly double what he'd budgeted, and that was without international travel, without business class, without anything extravagant. Just a retired man trying to use his freedom the way the brochures said he would. Here's the part no one tells you. Retirees travel during peak season because every season is available. They eat every meal out because they're away from home. And they have no work context to make the trip feel earned, so the spending feels exposed in a way it never did before. Rick didn't stop wanting to travel. He stopped being able to justify it to himself. But if the trips were expensive, at least his relationships at home would make up for the cost, right? My relationships will improve. Rick pictured this part clearly. Morning coffee with his wife, long conversations, weeknight dinners that weren't rushed, maybe reconnecting with old friends, guys from the neighborhood, people he hadn't seen in years. Retirement was supposed to be the season when relationships finally got the time they deserved. Instead, the phone rang less. It turns out that roughly 80% of Rick's social network was built around the shop. The guys he ate lunch with, the supervisors he argued with, the new hires who asked him questions, the UPS driver who showed up every morning at 7:45. None of those relationships were deep, but all of them were daily. And daily contact, even shallow daily contact, is what makes a person feel like they belong somewhere. Within 3 months, Rick was eating lunch alone most days. Not because he chose to, because the people he used to eat with were still at work. And at home, something shifted that he didn't see coming. His wife leaves at 7, she comes back at 6, she's tired, she wants dinner, quiet, maybe 30 minutes of television before bed. Rick has been sitting in the recliner since 10 in the morning. He wants to talk, he wants to tell her about the article he read, the thing he saw on the news, the idea he had for the backyard, but she's drained. And he has nothing new to report because his day didn't have anything in it. The marriage didn't worsen because of conflict, it worsened because of mismatch. One person is still on the clock, the other person is off it. And the gap between those two rhythms creates a kind of loneliness that's harder to name than the regular kind, because you're not alone, you're just out of sync. Research suggests that retirees lose about half of their regular social contacts within the first 2 years. Not because people stop caring, because the structure that held those contacts in place, the workplace, disappears. And without structure, relationships don't deepen, they evaporate. Rick didn't lose his friends. He lost the reason they saw each other every day. And replacing 30 years of built-in social infrastructure with intentional effort, calling people, making plans, showing up somewhere on purpose, turns out to be a skill he never developed. Because he never had to. The recliner doesn't help. He sits in it and scrolls through his phone. He sees the guys from the shop posting about a job they're running. A big one. Full color, tight deadline, the kind of run that used to give him a reason to stay late. He almost texts, but what would he say? Still, he told himself at least he's spending less without the commute and the lunches. I'll spend less without the commute and lunches out. This is the myth that has a price tag attached, and the price tag is bigger than most people expect. Rick did the math before he retired. Gas, tolls, parking, and daily lunch at the shop added up to about $3,000 a year. That was real money, and cutting it felt like a raise he could keep. What he didn't calculate was the thing that replaced it: health insurance. When Rick was working, his employer covered most of the premium. He paid about $200 a month for a solid plan, low deductible, decent prescription coverage, the kind of insurance you never think about because it just works. The moment he walked out, that coverage ended. Cobra gave him 18 months at the full premium, over $800 a month, and after that, he was on the ACA marketplace. And here's where the math turned ugly. The enhanced premium tax credits that had kept ACA marketplace plans affordable since 2021 expired at the end of 2025. A 60-year-old buying a benchmark silver plan without subsidies in 2026 is looking at $9,600 to over $11,000 a year depending on age and location. That's $800 to over $900 a month for one person. Rick's jaw dropped. He'd budgeted $300 a month for healthcare. He was off by $600 every single month for the next 9 years until Medicare kicks in at 65. Let's put that in perspective. The commute and lunches he eliminated cost $3,000 a year. The health insurance he didn't plan for costs over $10,000. He traded a $3,000 savings for a $10,000 expense. And that expense doesn't shrink. It grows every year as he ages into a higher premium bracket over the full gap from 56 to 65 9 years. Without employer-sponsored coverage, Rick's out-of-pocket healthcare costs land somewhere between $85,000 and $99,000. That single line item consumes more than 12% of his entire nest egg. Before he buys groceries, before he pays property tax, before he replaces the roof. $3,000 saved, $90,000 spent. But the financial discomfort was temporary. What mattered was that he'd finally earned his rest. He deserved it. I earned this rest. Nobody argued with that. Rick had earned it. 30 years on a concrete floor, 2 ownership changes, a paper shortage, a press that broke down twice a year, and somehow always got fixed because Rick knew where to hit it. He earned the rest. But rest has a shelf life. And Rick hit the expiration date faster than he expected. By month 8, the recliner wasn't a reward anymore. It was a symptom. He sat in it because he didn't know where else to go. The garage was organized, the yard was trimmed, the fishing rod was in the corner, the tackle box was dusty. And the question he couldn't answer, the one that followed him from room to room like a low hum, was simple. Who am I now? For 30 years, the answer was automatic. He was the guy who ran the Heidelberg, the guy who trained the new hires, the guy who showed up before everyone and left after most. That identity wasn't something he built consciously. It was built by the repetition of showing up day after day and being needed. Take the job away and the identity doesn't transfer. It just stops. And here's where Joe comes back in. Joe watched Rick leave. He shook his hand at the barbecue. He said, "You're the smartest guy I know." And he meant it. But Joe didn't follow him. Not because Joe couldn't afford to. His numbers were similar. $810,000, house paid off, same salary range. Joe didn't leave because he asked himself a question Rick never asked. What am I walking toward? Not away from, toward. While Rick was sitting in the recliner, Joe was building a woodworking shop in his garage on weekends, taking an online course in furniture restoration, joining a local makerspace. Not his hobbies as the scaffolding for the next version of himself. Joe decided he'd retire at 62 with a bridge to Medicare, with Social Security closer to full value, and with something waiting for him on the other side that had a name and a shape. The difference between Rick and Joe isn't money, it's sequence. Joe is building the life before he leaves the job. Rick left the job and expected the life to appear. It didn't. And that's when Rick started thinking, it's fine. If this doesn't work out, he'll just go back. If it doesn't work out, I'll just go back. Month 14. Rick updates his resume for the first time in 30 years. It takes him 2 days. He doesn't know what format to use. He doesn't know what keywords recruiters look for. He lists Heidelberg press operator 30 years and hopes that means something to someone. He applies to 4 jobs in 2 weeks. 2 are at print shops. 1 is a warehouse supervisor role. 1 is at a hardware store part-time, $16 an hour. Nobody calls. Here's the data behind the silence. According to AARP's 2026 workforce survey, 64% of workers over 50 have seen or personally experienced age discrimination in the workplace, not subtle bias. Direct, observable discrimination, being passed over, being pushed out, being told the role was filled when it wasn't. Rick isn't imagining it. The world he left 18 months ago moved on without him. The skills he had, mechanical intuition, press calibration, crew management, haven't changed, but the industry has. Digital pre-press workflows replaced half of what he used to do by hand. The new operators learned on systems Rick never touched. And the network that would have gotten him a phone call, the suppliers, the account managers, the competitors who knew his name, that network dissolved the day he stopped showing up. And the salary? The one warehouse role that finally responded offered him $42,000. Rick used to make $66,000. That's a 36% pay cut to do heavier physical work with less autonomy and no seniority. He sat in the recliner and stared at the offer email for 20 minutes, not because he was deciding, because he was trying to figure out how the guy everyone called the smartest guy I know ended up being offered $16 less per hour than what he was worth 18 months ago. Joe, meanwhile, is still at the shop, still employed, still building his exit on his terms. When Joe decides to leave, he'll leave with leverage a reference, a timeline, a transition plan, and the ability to say no to a bad offer. Rick lost that leverage the day he signed the papers at the barbecue. According to AARP, 7% of retirees unretired re-entered the labor force in the past 6 months. 48% of them said the primary reason was money, not purpose. Not boredom, money. The door Rick walked through doesn't swing both ways. It locks behind you. And the key costs more than most people are willing to pay. But at least the savings are there. $790,000, right? At least I have my savings. This is the final myth and the one with the biggest number attached. Let's walk through what retiring 4 years early actually costs Rick in dollars. Not in feelings, not in regret, in money he will never get back. Layer 1, Social Security. Rick plans to claim at 62, his full retirement age is 67. Claiming 5 years early triggers a permanent 30% reduction in his monthly benefit. According to the Social Security Administration, if his full benefit would be $2,000 a month at 67, claiming at 62 locks it in at $1,400. That's $600 less every month for life. $600 a month is $7,200 a year. Over 25 years, assuming Rick lives to 87, that's $180,000 in lifetime Social Security income he will never receive. And that reduction is permanent. It doesn't reset at 67. It doesn't adjust upward. It follows him and it follows his surviving spouse for as long as the checks come. $180,000. Layer 2, healthcare. 9 years without employer coverage. At roughly $10,000 to $11,000 a year, the total out-of-pocket cost falls between $90,000 and $99,000. If Rick had worked 4 more years to 60, his employer would have covered most of that premium for 4 of those 9 years. The incremental cost of leaving early, approximately $40,000 to $44,000 in healthcare alone. Layer 3, the portfolio. This one's illustrative, but the math is real. For 4 years, Rick is pulling roughly $40,000 a year from a portfolio that should still be growing. At the same time, he's not contributing no more 401k deferrals, no employer match, no catch-up contribution. Assuming a 7% average annual return, the combined effect of 4 years of withdrawals instead of contributions creates a portfolio gap north of $200,000 by the time he reaches 67. Now add the layers together. Social Security loss, $180,000. Healthcare gap, roughly $44,000. Portfolio swing conservatively, $200,000. And that's before the trips he overspent on, before the hobby equipment collecting dust, before the financial advisor fee he's now paying to figure out how to stretch what's left. The total cost of Rick retiring 4 years early, not 4 decades, 4 years lands somewhere in the range of $400,000. $400,000? That's more than half of what he saved in 30 years of work. And he found out sitting in a leather recliner he bought to celebrate. The smell of charcoal, the cold beer, Joe's hand on his back. That Saturday afternoon, everyone in Rick's backyard wanted to be him. He believed he'd have time for everything. He didn't. He believed he'd be healthier. He wasn't. He believed he'd travel. He couldn't afford to. He believed his relationships would deepen. They drifted. He believed he'd spend less. He spent more. He believed he'd earned the rest. The rest earned nothing back. He believed he could go back. The door was locked. He believed his savings were enough. They were until he did the math. 8 beliefs. Every one of them felt true on the day of the barbecue. Every one of them came with a cost he didn't see until he was already sitting in the chair. The best retirement isn't the earliest one. It's the one you built from the inside before you walked out the door. If you're in the window of deciding right now, which of these 8 did you believe the most? Tell me in the comments. And if this changed how you're thinking about your timeline, subscribe, because the next one goes deeper.